That morning, as my body trembled on that cold stretcher, I learned there is no pain greater than realizing the person you trusted the most chose not to come back. It wasn't a doctor who told me that. It wasn't a test result. It was the door closing behind her. It was the silence in the hallway. It was the sound of my own heart trying to understand something I never imagined I would have to accept. Because I didn't walk into that hospital expecting to be alone. I arrived believing in a promise. She looked straight into my eyes before we walked in and said she would stay by my side. She said she wouldn't leave me for a single second. She said everything a desperate mother wants to hear when fear tightens the chest and the air feels too thin. And I, with all my years of life, with all the experience time has given me, still believed her. I believed her because a mother always wants to believe. A mother believes even when life has already taught her that fragile promises break with the first gust of wind. But what I lived that day wasn't just the breaking of a promise. It was the breaking of something much bigger. When the nurse asked me to lie down on the stretcher, I clenched my teeth to hide the pain shooting through my legs, and my daughter held my hand for only 3 seconds. 3. And in those 3 seconds, I held on to whatever hope I had left. But when she glanced at the clock on the wall and said, "I'll be back in 5 minutes," I didn't know yet that would be the last touch of her hand I'd feel in that hospital. The door opened. She stepped out, and in that instant, something inside me collapsed, as if the floor had swallowed the last sense of safety I had. The hallway became very quiet, too quiet. And that's why I want you who are here with me now to write in the comments where you're listening from. City, state, country. It doesn't matter. Because the truth is, this story crosses borders. It isn't just mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever been left behind by someone who swore they'd stay. It belongs to anyone who has felt the cold sting of an abandonment that didn't need words to be understood. It belongs to every woman who has ever found herself alone in a place where no one should ever be alone. And while I lay there, feeling the icy metal of the stretcher cling to my skin, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't just the cold. It wasn't just fear. It was as if the entire atmosphere had changed color when she walked away. And even though I tried to control my breathing, tried to convince myself it was just a delay, deep down, I already knew there was something in the way she let go of my hand, in the way she said, "I'll be right back," in the way she didn't look back. I felt, deep in my soul, that 5 minutes were never going to happen, but I wasn't ready to admit that to myself yet. When the door closed behind her, the sound didn't feel like just another hospital noise. It felt like a sentence. It felt like the kind of sound that gets carved deep inside you, as if someone had ended an entire chapter of my life without asking my permission. The door clicked with that cold, mechanical precision, and the air shifted. To this day, I can still hear that sharp click, that dry snap that sounded more like a warning from fate itself, saying something had ended there, even if I didn't have the courage to admit it. I tried to breathe deeply, tried to convince myself it was just a regular door, the same one that opens and closes dozens of times a day as people come and go, as lives begin and lives end. But in that moment, it wasn't just a door. It was the beginning of a silence that cut deeper than any diagnosis ever could. I stayed there, motionless, feeling the stretcher steal whatever warmth my body still had. My fingers trembled without my control. I kept telling myself it was just the air conditioning, just nerves, just the hospital. Any explanation would do, as long as it kept me from thinking the thought pounding inside my head like a hammer. What if she doesn't come back? But a mother learns over time to argue with her own mind. So I repeated to myself that she was close, that she was just filling out paperwork or going to the restroom or catching her breath. Even though everything inside me was screaming otherwise, I forced my heart to believe the word quick, as if that one word could pull me away from the feeling of being abandoned. The hallway was crowded, yet somehow completely empty. People passed by, but no one really saw the woman trembling on that stretcher, trying to hold back the desperation rising behind her eyes. I watched every face, every white uniform crossing my line of sight, waiting to see my daughter appear suddenly, maybe with that rushed expression, saying she had lost track of time, saying I shouldn't worry, but nothing happened. And the longer it went on, the more that hallway that once seemed short began to stretch, as if the distance between me and her presence grew with every passing minute. I tried to remember the exact look on her face before she walked away. I tried to search for any sign that something was wrong. Was it exhaustion, irritation, distance, or was it simply indifference? I replayed every second before she went through that door, searching for clues I might have ignored out of fear. But all I could hear echoing inside me was that phrase, now painfully cruel. "I'll be back in 5 minutes. 5 minutes." As if 5 minutes were enough to keep hope alive. As if 5 minutes were too small a promise to be broken. And even so, as the clock kept ticking, I felt those 5 minutes transform into something bigger, something deeper, something I didn't want to confront. The stretcher beneath me felt harder. The bright hospital lights felt harsher, almost punishing. The sounds around me felt distant, as if the world kept moving forward while I remained frozen in that hallway. It was as though the entire hospital knew I was there, forgotten, but no one dared to speak the truth out loud. And as much as I fought that thought, reality kept pushing it closer to me. This wasn't a delay. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't distraction. It was a decision I didn't want to acknowledge, but could no longer deny. And it was exactly there, in that mix of cold, fear, and waiting, that I realized that hallway wasn't just empty. It was showing me something I had been avoiding for a very long time, something I wasn't ready to face but could no longer ignore. And it was exactly there, in that mix of cold, fear, and waiting, that I realized that door hadn't just closed behind her. It had closed around me too. The air felt heavier, colder, as if the hospital itself had decided to remind me that I was entirely on my own. When I lay on that stretcher, the chill of the metal cut through my skin as though it was trying to reach my heart, and in a way, it succeeded. The stretcher was cold, but what hurt the most was knowing that the cold didn't come only from the metal. It came from inside me. It came from something I could no longer hide from myself. I tried repositioning my body, looking for a way to ease the discomfort. But there is no posture that brings relief to a soul beginning to understand a kind of abandonment no one dares to speak out loud. Every second felt like an entire lifetime. The white ceiling above me was indifferent, and it watched me with the same coldness as the stretcher. No. Hospital is built to embrace anyone. Hospitals are built to test who still has strength left to continue. And among all the trials I've faced in life, that stretcher, in that moment, was one of the hardest. With every minute that passed, my body trembled a little more. It wasn't just the air conditioning. It was something deeper. It was the quiet recognition that my daughter, the same daughter who said she would stay with me, had left a trail of ice inside me when she walked away. I pressed my fingers into the sheet, trying to gather some warmth, some sign that I wasn't completely alone, but everything felt far away. The stretcher was simply the mirror of the truth. A mirror not showing my reflection, but her absence. As I breathed slowly, trying to control the trembling, something inside me began to shift. It was as if that coldness seeping into my body wanted to seep into my thoughts as well. I kept pushing the idea away, trying to resist the word forming inside me. Abandonment. That was it. Abandonment. But I kept fighting it, because accepting it would mean admitting that years of sacrifice, care, love, and devotion had turned into nothing, and no one wants to admit they've become nothing. But the stretcher insisted. Every cold point against my skin felt like it carried a message I wasn't ready to hear. It was as though it whispered, "You're on your own." And no matter how much my heart tried to respond, saying she would return, that this was just a delay, that everything would be fine, the cold metal answered back with the same merciless truth. I was there, vulnerable, lying down, trembling, waiting for someone who might have already decided not to come back. That is the truth the stretcher revealed, not with words, but with cold. I felt my breath shorten. It wasn't physical shortness of breath. It was fear, a fear so deep it seemed to take up space inside my chest, pushing out every certainty I still had. I remembered her hand holding mine before she left. But the more I thought about that touch, the farther away it seemed, fragile, faint, almost unreal, as if it had been a reflex, not affection. And that realization hurt more than the cold of the stretcher, more than the hospital itself. I slowly turned my head toward the hallway, where she had disappeared. The bright white light blended with the emptiness. The hospital was full of people, but no face, no voice, no footsteps had what I needed in that moment. I needed her, and the stretcher seemed to know that wouldn't happen. It was strange to feel as though the very walls were preparing me for something I wasn't ready to face. And if you've ever felt something like this, type the word cold in the comments. Not physical cold, the emotional cold that moves into your bones when life shows you that someone you love has a heart farther away than you ever wanted to believe. And that cold, in that moment, didn't come only from the stretcher. It came from a decision I didn't yet have the strength to name, but could already feel. With each minute I spent there, it became clearer that it wasn't just my body lying vulnerable. It was my entire story. It was as if the stretcher drew a line between who I had been and who I was becoming. Before, I still believed she would walk back through that door. After, I began sensing that maybe that door wouldn't open for me again. And the stretcher, quiet and cold, witnessed this shift inside me. A shift I never asked for, but life forced me to face. And even as I tried to stay calm, my heart already knew. It knew that all that cold wasn't a coincidence. It knew something bigger was happening, something I didn't want to look at directly but could no longer avoid. It was as if the stretcher itself, with all its indifference, was telling me that what awaited me was not a test result or a procedure. It was the truth, and sometimes the truth is colder than any metal in a hospital. The stretcher, in that moment, wasn't just holding me. It was revealing me, and that revelation was far from over. The nurses rushed back and forth, pushing stretchers, holding clipboards, calling out names that weren't mine. I turned my head again and again, trying to find even the slightest trace of my daughter among the people walking through that hallway. Nothing. It was as if she had evaporated the moment she crossed that door. A younger woman entered the corridor crying, clinging to someone who held her tight. Another, older, was accompanied by her son, who kept a firm grip on her arm. Everyone had someone. Everyone had a familiar face by their side. I was the only one trapped between the cold metal of a stretcher and a silence no one seemed willing to explain. And the more I searched, the more I realized that no one there had any answers for my abandonment. I tried asking a nurse if she had seen my daughter. She looked at me quickly, with that kind of hurried expression that only people who deal with pain every single day carry in their eyes, and said she didn't know. It was such a fast answer, so automatic, that I didn't even have time to understand whether there was pity, indifference, or just routine in her voice. The hallway was far too big to hold someone who didn't want to be found, and I began to understand that maybe no one was looking for her at all, because no one around me seemed to notice that a mother had been left alone, completely alone. The feeling of invisibility began settling over me like a second skin. I tried adjusting the sheet, tried pulling some warmth toward myself, but that hospital had no warmth to give. Everything was cold, the floor cold, the walls cold, the air cold, the silence cold, and what hurt the most was realizing her heart was cold too. A coldness I didn't want to see, but that surrounded me from every direction. It's hard to explain what it feels like to search for someone with your eyes, and every time you look up, realize no one is coming back for you. And if you've ever felt something like this, type the word silence in the comments, because this kind of pain isn't screamed, it's swallowed. I kept looking at the clock on the wall. The hands moved with a calmness that almost mocked my anxiety. Every minute was torture. Every second reminded me she had said she'd be back in 5 minutes. But the clock showed much more than that. I began to feel that even my refusal to accept the truth was abandoning me. It was as if the cold stretcher had prepared me for this moment, and now time was confirming what I didn't want to admit. That hallway wasn't just the space between two doors. The hallway was a sentence, a place where I was learning, second by second, that no one was coming for me. People kept walking by. I saw expressions of worry, grief, hurry, relief. I saw mothers, sons, sisters, wives, husbands, all accompanied by someone. And every time I saw one hand holding another, one person supporting someone they loved, my heart broke a little more. I tried not to show it. A woman my age doesn't cry easily in public, but what was happening inside me wasn't crying. It was helplessness. It was the feeling of being forgotten in a place where no one should ever be forgotten. I shifted my body again, trying to find any small hint of comfort, and it was then that something even more troubling struck me. No one had asked about me. No one approached to say, "She left a message. She said she'd be back. She's in the waiting room." Nothing. There was no sign that my daughter had even spoken my name after leaving. That absence, that emptiness, that silence was more brutal than if someone had come to tell me plainly that she wasn't coming back. Because when someone tells you, you deal with the truth. When no one tells you anything, you deal with a raw, invisible kind of abandonment. The silence wasn't only around me, it was entering me. It was as if my mind were becoming as quiet as that hallway, because there were no arguments left to defend my hope. I tried remembering the times when I believed I mattered, the times when I thought a mother's love was enough to keep someone by your side. But lying on that stretcher, surrounded by noises that had nothing to do with me and by people who didn't even notice I existed, I started to understand that maybe my importance in her life was far smaller than I ever imagined. The stretcher remained cold, but now it felt like the silence was what pierced through me. A heavy, dense silence, full of meanings I didn't want to interpret. I looked at the hallway the way someone looks at a past falling apart, and every time a doctor walked by without looking at me, every time a nurse hurried past without noticing I was there, every time a patient was called and I remained motionless, forgotten, I felt the abandonment becoming real. It wasn't an impression. It wasn't an exaggeration. It wasn't drama. It was fact. And that silence, so loud and uncomfortable, was the confirmation. I tried to breathe. My throat burned, as if I had swallowed the truth. And the truth is bitter. The truth hurts. The truth makes no sound, but it weighs. And as I stared at the door that wouldn't open, waiting for footsteps that never came, I realized something much bigger was happening, something I needed to face, no matter how painful. Because the silence of that hallway was about to teach me something that would change everything. When the silence in the hallway became bigger than any presence, and the cold stretcher had already done the cruel work of revealing what I had tried so hard to hide from myself, something deeper began to stir inside me. It was as if the waiting had opened drawers I had kept locked for years, drawers full of memories I believed I had already outgrown, but that now surged forward with enough force to tear through any defense I had left. I wanted to keep my mind in the present, in the hospital, in the closed door, in that endless hallway. But pain has a way of dragging us backward, back to the exact moment where things began to break, even if we only notice it decades later. Suddenly, the white hospital walls blended with images of my daughter as a little girl, running through the house, tripping over her own feet, calling me with that tiny voice that sounded like music. It was impossible not to remember. I saw her with messy hair, scraped knees, that innocent smile only a child has when she believes her mother is the center of the world. I could hear her footsteps on the floor, the silly joy of showing me a crooked drawing, the way she held my hand as if I could protect her from anything. And lying on that stretcher, I remembered the nights I stayed awake, caring for her when the thermometer climbed too high, praying the fever would break, begging God not to let anything happen to my little girl. I always feared losing my daughter. I just never imagined I would lose her this way, by her own choice. The memories came in waves, some gentle, some violent. I remembered working late into the night, exhausted, drained, but still coming home with enough strength to cook her favorite dish. I remembered how many times I skipped buying something for myself just to make sure she had what she wanted. A mother learns early that love has a price, and that price is often paid in silent sacrifices. And I sacrificed so much. I sacrificed dreams, rest, my own pain, all to care for hers. I sacrificed parts of myself just to make sure she had everything I didn't. And now I was lying on a cold stretcher, forced to accept that the same daughter I did everything for chose to leave me alone in a hospital. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady the wave rising inside me, but my mind, stubborn, insisted on bringing more images. I saw her first day of school, clinging to my arm so tightly it seemed she would never let go. I remembered her tears when she didn't want to stay, and how I had to hide my own tears so she could find courage. I saw her 7th birthday, when I improvised a cake with whatever ingredients I had, and she told me it was the best cake in the world. I saw every sacrifice disguised as protection, every fear swallowed to keep her life light, every tear hidden so she would never feel guilty for anything. And the more these memories rose, the more I understood that the pain hitting me in that hospital didn't come from illness, didn't come from the exam, didn't come from a tired body. The pain came from the contrast, the brutal contrast between everything I gave and the abandonment I was receiving now. There is no medical test that shows that kind of pain. No X-ray reveals it. Only a mother knows what it feels like to carry a wound made from love given freely and love not returned. I remembered the arguments, the misunderstandings, the moments she said I was too strict, too demanding, too present. I remembered the times she turned her face away to avoid my advice. The phase when everything I said seemed wrong, when any form of care seemed like control. I remembered how she blamed me for mistakes I made while trying to get things right. And I remembered, most sharply, the times she said she didn't need me. Words like that wound deeply, but we learned to swallow them. What I didn't know was that, one day, swallowing those words would become routine, and that routine would lead me right here, on a stretcher, in a hospital, abandoned. I opened my eyes again because I didn't, want to drown in those memories, but they kept returning. I saw her as a teenager, full of sharp answers, full of certainty, in a rush to grow up. I remembered the day she told me I was too old-fashioned, too slow, too dramatic. I remembered when she stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as a burden. And it's strange how a single sentence can echo for years. I remembered her saying, "I can handle my life on my own, Mom." And now, lying on that cold stretcher, I realized maybe that had always been true. She always wanted to handle life alone. In trying to free herself from me, she forgot that one day I would be the one needing her. And if you've lived this kind of ingratitude, type the word memories in the comments. Because these memories, painful as they are, tell the truth many mothers hide. Loving too much often hurts too much. And I was feeling that full weight in that hallway. I also remembered the happy moments which somehow made everything even more painful. The laughter, the hugs, the simple days that felt eternal. The way she called me when she needed comfort. The way she ran to me when she was scared. The way she once said I was the strongest woman she knew. It's hard to accept that someone who once admired you so deeply now looks at you with indifference. It's hard to accept that someone who once sought your arms for safety now abandons you in your most vulnerable moment. It's hard to accept that a love you spent years building wasn't enough to keep a door open. The memories blended with the reality of the hospital. I looked at the ceiling and saw her childhood. I looked at the hallway and saw time slipping between my fingers. I looked at the door and saw every promise I made to myself the day she was born. Promises to never leave her alone, to always protect her. Promises I kept with every fiber of my being. The contrast between who I had been for her and who she was being for me cut like a knife. Not because I expected recognition, but because I expected humanity. I expected presence. I expected her to at least hold my hand the way I held hers countless times throughout her life. My throat tightened again, not because I was about to cry, but because the truth was rising like something that needed to be swallowed before it overflowed. And it was then I realized the memories weren't appearing randomly. They were trying to show me something I had kept hidden from myself for years, something I needed to see, know, matter how much it hurt. Because the cold stretcher had revealed the first truth, and now these memories were ready to reveal the second. The memories came like waves, each one pulling me deeper into a truth I had avoided for too long. But at that moment, still lying on that cold stretcher, I realized that no memory, not even the most painful one, could prepare me for what was about to happen. Until then, I had been dealing with a suspicion, a fear, a possibility that she had been delayed, distracted, lost somewhere in the hospital. I was wrestling with reality because there was still a mother inside me trying to protect the daughter, even when the daughter had stopped protecting me long ago. But life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It puts the truth in front of us without asking permission, without measuring the damage it will cause. And that's exactly what happened when a nurse passed by holding a clipboard. She glanced at me quickly, with the kind of look only people who know pain by routine have, and perhaps without thinking much, or simply following protocol. She said something that ripped a hole inside my chest. The person who came in with you already left, okay? I just need to confirm if someone else is coming back or if we need to register you as unaccompanied. For a moment, I didn't understand. Or maybe I didn't want to. My mind rejected that sentence the way a body rejects something foreign. But the nurse was already walking away by the time I managed to react. And even without strength, without voice, I managed to call out, "What do you mean she left?" The nurse turned slightly, her voice calm in that unsettling way only people in her profession master, and said, "She went through the reception a while ago. I'm not sure where she went after that." And that was it. No drama, no pause, no explanation. Just a simple, short, undeniable sentence. My daughter had left, accompanied, gone, not coming back. It was as if each word had been placed one after the other to dismantle whatever hope still tried to survive inside me. The hallway grew even longer, even whiter, even emptier. The stretcher grew colder. My body felt as though it were sinking into it. I turned my face toward the door, as if I could force it open with sheer will, but it remained shut, still, indifferent. The same door I had watched with so much anxiety, waiting for it to open for me, now seemed to mock me with its silence. And in that moment, I understood what my memories had been trying to prepare me for. This wasn't a delay. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't distraction. It was a choice. The choice to walk away. The choice not to return. The choice to leave me alone in a hospital, lying on a cold stretcher, vulnerable, tired, and depending on someone who decided she no longer wanted any responsibility over me. I felt the air leave my lungs as if someone had pressed down on my chest from the inside. It wasn't the illness. It wasn't the hospital. It was the discovery. A discovery so heavy it seemed to take up space in the entire room. Instinctively, I reached for my phone. My hands trembled so much it took several seconds to unlock the screen. I tapped her name. I called. The call didn't even ring. It went straight to voicemail. I hesitated before trying again. And on the second attempt, the same thing happened. Voicemail. Silence. A silence that screamed the entire truth. Turning off the phone. Blocking calls. Avoiding any possibility of contact. That wasn't just abandonment. That was escape. That was rejection. That was proof that on that morning, while I battled fear inside the hospital, she was outside fighting just as hard to get farther away from me. I tried to breathe slowly, but it felt like the hallway was closing in on me, as if everything around me were tightening. The world began spinning, not because of the condition that brought me to the hospital, but because of the pain that was being born inside me with an overwhelming force. A pain that had no remedy, no bandage, no anesthesia. A pain only a mother knows when she realizes she has been left behind by someone she once held in her arms, fed, protected, and loved without limits. I tried calling out to someone. My voice came out short, shaky. The nurse turned back, maybe noticing the desperation in my eyes. I asked again. She said my daughter had been seen walking out through the main entrance. She said she didn't have more details because things were hectic at that hour. And I just stared at her face, searching for some kind of hope, any possibility that this was just a misunderstanding. But her expression was steady. There was no mistake. My daughter had left. She had walked away, and no one could tell me why. A tear slid down my face, warm, while everything around me was cold. I didn't cry loudly. I didn't fall apart. I just let that tear fall because, for the first time that morning, I was accepting the truth, a sharp truth, a truth that sliced through my soul like a blade. A truth far more painful than any diagnosis I could receive in that hospital, because a diagnosis speaks of the body, but abandonment speaks of the soul. And the soul feels deeper, it feels longer, it feels harder. I tried imagining possibilities. Maybe she'd gotten an urgent call. Maybe she had gone to get something important. Maybe she had a problem. But those excuses, the same ones that once made sense to a mother desperate to believe, now seemed far too fragile to hold up any hope. Too much time had passed. The hallway had revealed too much. The stretcher had said too much. And her cell phone turned off was the last piece needed to complete the painful puzzle forming right in front of me. And if you've ever lived through this kind of discovery, type the word truth in the comments. Because truth, when it arrives, doesn't knock. It simply walks in. And when it walks in, it changes everything. I tugged at the bedsheet, trying to find something. steady to hold on to, but everything slipped through my fingers, and I realized it wasn't the sheet that was loose. It was my life. It was my relationship with her. It was everything I had held on to as certainty for years. The discovery hurt more than any diagnosis ever could. No doctor had to tell me. No machine had to show me. Life itself, with its cold and precise cruelty, showed me exactly what I needed to see. And somehow, in that huge hospital, full of people, full of movement, full of noise, I felt smaller than I had ever felt. Because more than a patient, I was a mother abandoned. A mother who was beginning to understand that this abandonment wasn't an accident. It had been a decision, and it was that decision that began breaking me from the inside. While I still tried to gather the strength to face whatever would come next, in that instant when the truth finally settled inside me, heavy like a stone placed on my chest, something began happening that I couldn't control. It was as if my body understood everything faster than my mind could process. And even before I fully accepted that I had been abandoned, my body already knew. Because the body understands before reason. It feels before thought. It reacts before consciousness allows. And mine reacted. It felt like a wave, hot and cold at the same time, ran down my back while I lay there on that stretcher. The feeling of abandonment, now confirmed, didn't come only as pain. It came as exhaustion, pulling. Everything downward, as if my muscles were giving up on me. My arm grew heavy. My legs went numb. My breathing grew shallow, each inhale demanding more strength than I had left. And inside that quiet confusion taking over me, something much greater happened. My soul screamed. Not a scream anyone could hear. Not a scream that filled the hallway. It was an internal scream, deep and torn. The kind of scream that doesn't need sound to destroy whatever is still standing inside a person. A scream that said everything I had no strength to say out loud. A scream that said everything my body couldn't express anymore. A scream that said, I didn't deserve this. My body, however, stayed still. The stretcher pressed against my back with an even colder indifference, as if the metal sensed I was losing strength and refused to offer even the smallest bit of warmth. The environment around me echoed that same immobility. The hospital remained full of noise, hurried footsteps, muffled conversations, phones ringing, yet none of it seemed to reach me. It was as if I were separated from the rest of the world by an invisible wall only I could feel, as if my pain had placed me in a different territory, one where no one saw me, no one heard me, no one touched me. I tried lifting my fingers to adjust the sheet again, maybe just to hold on to something that could keep me grounded, but my fingers didn't move the way I wanted. They were slow, weak, as if the simple act of lifting the fabric required a courage I didn't have at that moment. My throat felt tight too, not from physical pain, but because emotion had taken over all the space. It's incredible how the soul can scream so loudly inside while the body remains silent on the outside. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to let those tears fall in that cold place, exposed, vulnerable, surrounded by strangers who spent their days dealing with pain, loss, abandonment. I didn't want to become one more forgotten face. The older woman left in a corner, the mother on a stretcher with no one beside her, the patient without a companion. But it was too late to pretend to be strong. Strength was slipping away from me like water through my fingers. The harder I tried to hold it, the faster it disappeared. When the first tear fell, it was like something inside me cracked open. I didn't break down sobbing. I didn't lose control. I cried the way mothers cry when they have nowhere else to run. The tears were silent, heavy, hot, a painful irony, because my body was cold, yet my tears burned. And this mix of cold on the outside and heat on the inside created a feeling I can't describe without reliving it. It was as if my body whispered, "You're still human, even when they try to make you forget that." And while my body stayed silent, my soul kept screaming, screaming memories, screaming broken promises, screaming questions I didn't dare put into words. Why did she do this? When did I stop being a priority? What broke between us that I failed to see? But as soon as those questions tried to form, I cut them off, because I knew that too many questions can drag you into dangerous places. And in that hospital, in that moment, I needed to stay at least somewhat conscious. I needed to stay with myself, even if my daughter no longer was. Every breath felt like a battle against my own body just to stay awake. There wasn't a sharp pain, but there was crushing exhaustion, a weariness that came straight from the soul, as if every emotion accumulated over the years had finally come to collect its price. I tried closing my eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to try to understand this new weight that had just fallen over me. Closing my eyes was like turning the world off for a few seconds. But the moment I closed them, the image of her walking away flashed through my mind like a film that doesn't respect pauses. I opened my eyes quickly, startled by the intensity of the memory. The hospital felt even farther away, and the feeling that washed over me was one of the cruelest anyone can experience. The feeling of having no one, of losing something essential inside yourself while still being alive, because a daughter may abandon her mother. But when that happens, the mother doesn't abandon the pain. The pain stays, the pain grows, the pain breathes with you. I tried turning my head toward the hallway again, as if that small gesture could protest against the reality I was facing, but my neck felt stiff, tight, as if my own body refused to move, afraid that granting movement would let the pain spread even further. The emotional weight was so immense, it turned my entire body into something fragile, and I realized that in that exact moment, I was living one of the lowest points of my life, the kind of moment that never leaves, because it brands the soul deeply. If anyone there had stopped to look into my eyes, they would have seen the silent struggle happening inside me, the battle between staying upright and collapsing, between trying to remain the strong woman I had always been and admitting that I no longer had the strength to hold up under that emotional avalanche. They would have seen my body quiet, still, exhausted, but they also would have felt the scream coming from inside, a scream that wasn't asking for help, a scream that wasn't asking for explanations, a scream that was simply the sound of truth finally settling into my chest. I inhaled deeply, even with difficulty, trying to find some kind of balance within myself, but balancing a heart freshly broken by such a violent truth was impossible. The stretcher seemed determined to hold me in place, as if it were part of the story itself, as if it were witnessing the exact moment a mother finally recognized the depth of the abandonment she had suffered. And maybe it was. Maybe that stretcher was the perfect symbol of everything I was feeling: cold, hard, silent, indifferent. If you're listening to me now and have ever lived something similar, write the word strength in the comments. Not because I want you to pretend to be strong, but because only someone who has ever had a silent body and a screaming soul understands what that word truly means. Strength isn't always standing up. Sometimes strength is simply continuing to breathe while the world collapses around you. And so, with my weakened body and shattered soul, I stayed there, waiting for the next chapter of that pain. Because whether I wanted it or not, life still had more to show me in that room, in that hospital, on that stretcher that seemed determined to reveal every truth I had hidden from myself for so many years. It was there, in that heavy silence that seemed to expand through the hospital walls, that the truth began forming inside me. It didn't arrive all at once. It didn't strike like lightning. It appeared like a light, small at first, hesitant, growing until it illuminated everything that had been hidden. And as that light expanded within me, I began to see things with a painful, almost merciless clarity, as if life itself had decided I'd been running long enough. It was time to see. My daughter didn't abandon me in that hospital. It happened long before. And when that sentence formed inside me, it hit with such force that I felt my chest tremble. It wasn't spoken out loud, but it was so old, so true, so deeply buried. It felt like it had been written years ago, just waiting for the right moment to surface. The cold stretcher, the silent hallway, the phone turned off, all of it was simply the final chapter of a story being written piece by piece, gesture by gesture, silence by silence. I began remembering small things I ignored because mothers do that. We ignore to avoid getting hurt, we forgive without apologies, we justify behaviors no one else would. I remembered the times her tone carried an impatience she didn't bother to hide, the way she began distancing herself slowly, as if always too busy to listen to her own mother. I remembered the forgotten dates, the rushed visits, the short messages answered as if every word were an effort, I remembered everything I told myself was normal, part of life, just a phase. But the truth was hidden inside those memories, and I had never had the courage to put the pieces together. I said she loved me, and of course I wanted to believe that. But love isn't just words. Love stays. Love stands beside you. Love holds your hand when the world is falling apart. Love shows up when fear takes over. And that morning, in that hospital, she decided I wasn't worth showing up for. And if I were honest with myself, I'd realize that decision didn't start there. That abandonment was simply the most visible expression of something that had been happening for a long time. It was as if her heart had been stepping away from mine slowly, quietly, like someone backing up without making noise so no one notices. And I, busy loving, caring, excusing, never noticed every step she took was a choice. The choice to be distant, the choice to prioritize others, the choice to free herself from the weight of having a mother who had grown old. Because that exists, people who can't handle the aging of the one who once held everything together. And when they can't handle it, they choose to run. And I felt that revelation like a blade. Not a quick blade that cuts at once, a slow blade, one that slices deeply, layer by layer. The truth arrived without apologizing. It came to stay. It came to show me I needed to stop protecting an image that existed only in my mind. Because in real life, in the true story, my daughter had already learned to live without me. What I hadn't realized was that in learning to live without me, she also learned to leave me behind. When someone abandons you in a hospital, it is not an isolated act. It is the reflection of something larger. And in that moment, I understood she wasn't running from the room. She was running from me, running from the role I represented, running from everything I reminded her of. Sacrifices, expectations, mirrors, responsibilities, truths. Maybe she carried old resentments she never spoke. Maybe someone influenced her into believing I was a burden. Maybe she had fallen into the kind of selfishness people embrace when they start believing the world only makes sense when they're at the center. Or maybe it was simply lack of love, a lack that grew quietly until it became a definitive decision. And as I revisited all of this within myself, the pain stopped being pain from the moment and became accumulated pain. The pain of realizing I had spent years fighting to keep a bond that from her side had already been severed. The pain of realizing the love I offered so fully, so completely, so sacrificially, never found room to grow in her heart the way it grew in mine. The pain of realizing that, to her, I was a weight, maybe an inconvenience, maybe a reminder of something she didn't want to face. And that understanding didn't break me because I was weak. It broke me because it was true. Everything around me seemed to agree with this revelation. The hospital with its cold air, the white sheets, so neutral, the stretcher, so unyielding. It was as if every element in that environment aligned perfectly to mirror what I was living. Coldness, distance, indifference. And there was no music, no conversation, no gesture that could soften any of it. It was the truth, raw and exposed in front of me. Suddenly, I remembered a conversation I had with a neighbor years ago. She told me abandonment doesn't happen on the day someone walks away. It happens through small gestures, hidden absences, silences that pile up. At the time, I heard her, but I didn't understand. Today, lying on that stretcher, every word made sense. My daughter didn't abandon me in the hospital. She abandoned me when she stopped listening, when she stopped coming close, when she stopped seeing me. The hospital only made visible what she had already decided in her heart. If you've ever realized that someone left you long before the day they actually walked away, type the word truth in the comments. Because that kind of revelation cuts deep, but it also opens your eyes in a way nothing else can. I felt my chest tighten again, but not like before. It wasn't the tightness of panic anymore. It was the tightness of understanding. Understanding hurts, but it also sets you free. And in that moment, even with the wound still open, even with my soul in pieces, I started to see that the hole she left in me hadn't been made that morning. It had been dug for years, slowly, silently, while I was too busy being a mother. People think abandonment is a sudden act, but most of the time, abandonment is a construction of distance, a construction of emotional coldness, a construction of resentment. And when the final act finally happens, it doesn't really surprise the ones who were paying attention all along. It shocks the ones who still insisted on believing in something that no longer existed. I was that person. I was the woman who believed, until the very end, that there was love, that there was loyalty, that there was a bond. But in that hospital, on that stretcher, on that morning, I had to admit, what I believed in wasn't there anymore, and maybe it had never existed in the way I imagined. That was the truth that finally revealed itself, a truth that didn't heal me, but brought clarity. And sometimes, clarity is the first step to surviving what comes next. The revelation that took shape inside me in that hospital didn't just bring pain, it brought light. A light so intense it seemed to cut through every layer I had placed over my own feelings just to avoid facing the truth. And as that light spread through me, something changed. It wasn't an instant miracle. It wasn't a sudden gust of courage. It wasn't a strength that fell from heaven. It was quiet. It was slow. It was a kind of awakening that starts in the soul, then reaches the mind, then finally, the body. And I knew, in that moment, that something was being born inside me at the same time that something else was dying. The cold stretcher, the same one that had held my body while it trembled, now seemed to be holding another part of me. Not the weight of my weakness, but the first sparks of a strength I never imagined I would find again, after everything I had lived through in that place. And the most surprising part is that it didn't come from outside. It didn't come from anyone's gesture. It didn't come from comforting words. It came from within. It came from the space the truth opened up when it ripped away all the illusions I had protected for so many years. The truth hurts, but it frees. It tears down, but it also builds new paths. I started feeling a different kind of tremor in my hands. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was as if my body were responding to this new awareness slowly taking up room inside me, as if finally I were understanding that despite the abandonment, despite the loneliness, despite the coldness of that place, I was still alive. I was still breathing. I still had a story. And my story wasn't going to end on a stretcher. It wasn't going to end in a hospital hallway. It wasn't going to end with someone else's decision to walk away. I closed my eyes for a second, not to escape, but to feel that change happening inside me. The pain was still there, of course, a deep pain that wouldn't disappear anytime soon. But next to the pain, something new began to grow, something that felt like dignity, like self-awareness, like the kind of courage that is born precisely in the moments when we feel the most broken. Life is strange like that. It finds a way to raise us up in the most unlikely places. And in that hospital, in that cold environment, in that moment of abandonment, something inside me was standing up. I realized I couldn't stay lying down forever. The stretcher had been the stage of my revelation, but it would not be the place where I stayed. I felt my fingers move with more firmness, as if they were waking up after a long winter. I took a deep breath, feeling my chest open a little more. It wasn't full strength, but it was strength enough to try. And trying, in that moment, was already a victory. Every small movement I made was a silent declaration that, despite everything, I had not been destroyed. I had been revealed. Carefully, I pushed my arm against the mattress and lifted my upper body slightly. It was a small movement, but inside me it felt enormous. It wasn't an attempt to run away from the hospital or to erase what had happened. It was an attempt to tell myself that I existed beyond the pain, that I was not just the abandonment I had suffered, that I was not just the mother left behind. I was a woman who had walked all her life carrying experiences, stories, battles, love, and loss. And no one else's decision could erase that. The stretcher, no longer as cold as before, seemed almost to understand this urgency I felt to be reborn, as if it were finally fulfilling its last purpose, not to lay me low, but to teach me how to rise. And as I slowly lifted myself up, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt my own presence, not the presence of the mother, not the presence of the provider, not the presence of the woman who lives to meet everyone else's expectations. The presence of a woman, a human being, someone who, even wounded, still had value, still had dignity, still had a future. It was only when I managed to sit up fully that I understood, in a deep way, that my daughter's abandonment did not decide my destiny. It explained part of my pain, yes, but it did not define who I was. It spoke about her, not about me, and that separation, that ability to recognize that not everything someone does to you is about you, was one of the biggest rebirths of my life. Because for years, I carried guilt that was never mine, guilt that maybe never belonged to me at all. And in that moment, sitting on that stretcher, I handed it all back to where it came from. The hospital kept its rhythm, its sounds, its rush. People walked by, talked, went on with their lives, but somehow, all of that felt distant. I was moving in a different way now, an inward movement, intimate, revealing. It was as if, finally, I were seeing myself from the inside out, without masks, without illusions, without the weight of other people's expectations. And the woman I saw there, even tired, even bruised, had a strength I hadn't recognized in a long time, but that had always been there, hidden under decades of motherhood, sacrifice, and survival. I looked toward the hallway, not expecting the door to open. In fact, by then, I didn't even want it to open anymore, because waiting for someone who chose to leave is another way of staying trapped. And I decided, in that exact moment, that I would not be a prisoner of abandonment. I had a right to my own rebirth. I had a right to my own life. I had a right to get up from that stretcher and move forward. And not move forward in spite of the abandonment, but because I deserved more than that. A deep calm settled inside me. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't instant relief. It was something closer to acceptance. The acceptance that not every pain closes, but every pain can teach. And that particular pain was teaching me something precious, that I needed to learn how to choose myself again, to choose my peace, to choose my faith, to choose my dignity. And that rebirth had nothing to do with my daughter. It had everything to do with me. I touched my own hand, the way you do when you find company in your own skin. And that simple, human, real feeling was enough to remind me that I was still here, that I could still begin again, that I could still find paths that didn't depend on anyone else being present or absent. The cold stretcher had witnessed my abandonment, but it was also witnessing my awakening. And as I drew a deeper breath, feeling new air enter my lungs, I understood that life still had things to show me, things about strength, about rebirth, about rebuilding. And in that moment, I was ready. Not ready to forget what happened, but ready not to let it define me, ready to stand up, ready to walk, ready to live. And now that this story has reached its end, I want to invite you to keep walking with me, because the journey of the woman who rises again, the matriarch who finds her strength in the most unlikely place, continues in the next video that's appearing on your screen. Another story, another wound, another truth, another victory. This channel exists to reveal what so many women hide in silence, the courage that is born on the very days when the world tries the hardest to break us. Click on the video that's showing up now and come with me. Your strength is still there.